doesn't exist constitutionally. The government overstepped its bounds in creating it. But now, in our modern society, in our modern America, the bureaucracy is, for all intents and purposes, even though it answers to the executive technically, it operates like it's its own fourth branch. You let the IRS make a rule and see if the American people don't have to follow it, as if it's a law. You let the EPA make a regulation and see if companies that are trying to operate at a profitable level don't have to follow that regulation as if it's a law. Now, in the Constitution, it sets out specifically the separation of powers. Only the legislature, only our House of Representatives and our Congress are supposed to have the right and the power and the authority to write, draft, and pass laws. They can barely do that now. They seem to be the only branch of our government, even if you count the fourth branch, that can't seem to get that done. The executive branch is responsible for oversight of the military by virtue of being the commander-in-chief. It's supposed to write the budget for the federal government, which then must be approved by Congress, and has the responsibility of seeing the laws that have been passed by Congress and either signing them into effect or vetoing them based on constitutional grounds, not political ones. When was the last time we had a president veto a law strictly on a constitutional ground? Hint, it's been a little while. In fact, since Barack Obama's been in office, I seriously question whether or not a bill that's been passed and put in front of him to be signed into law has even been read by him, whether he signed it or vetoed it. I doubt he even took the time to see what was in it. Why? Because he, like Nancy Pelosi, firmly believe we have to pass the bill to find out what's in the bill. We have the executive branch who now thinks that because he has a pen and he's got a phone, that he can take executive action. Now, he's real careful not to call very many of them executive orders anymore. Oftentimes, you'll hear people talking about them, referring to them as executive orders, because by definitions, that's still what they are. But he's taking executive action, sidestepping Congress, changing things like immigration law and immigration policy, and, of course, doing little things like changing the deadlines for Obamacare. Did anybody remember when he did that? That was a change in the law that nobody challenged, at least not in court. Obama just did that on his own, on a whim, by fiat, executive fiat. There it is, it's done. Poof. How? Why? Under what authority? By authority that I'm the president, bitch. That's his mindset. I'm Barack Obama, and I can do what I want. I've got a pen, and I've got a phone, and I'm going golfing. So now the executive branch has legislative authority. Again, why? Well, because despite threats to challenge in court, we never actually saw anything of merit fully challenged. We have yet to see the administration comply with any court orders that have been put in front of them as it is. And this past week, we've seen the Supreme Court itself, in its landmark ruling in regards to Obamacare, decide that it too has the authority to legislate, that it too has the ability to fix what's in front of it, despite the fact that countless laws that have been challenged and made its way for those challenges to get to the court have been tossed out for no other reason than poor construction, inconsistency throughout the bill in either the language or the apparent intention of how the bill operates. We have seen on a multitude of occasions the Supreme Court decide that a law is unconstitutional based on the merits of the law, not on the merits of trying to ascertain something outside of the law that should apply to the law. Because that's how we got the constitutionality of the individual mandate in the first place. Justice Roberts, despite the Obama administration arguing time and time again in every federal court and in every appeal until it got to the Supreme Court, and even then in front of the Supreme Court, arguing over and over and, oh yes, over again, it's not a tax. Well, Justice Roberts says it is a tax, and I'm not going to protect the American people from the consequences of the election. How about this, Justice Roberts? How about protecting the American people from the injustice of laws being passed that aren't constitutional? How about that? Is that so unreasonable? Since it is kind of like supposed to be your job and all. That is what the Supreme Court is there for. No matter what the four progressive judges on the court may think, your role is not to be an activist. Your role is not to legislate from the bench. Your role is to decide whether or not something that the government has done via the legislative branch or the executive branch happens to fall within its constitutional authority. And if it does not, you strike it down. That's what you're there for. That's your job. Not to find a way to kind of sort of make the argument stick. But that's what you've done. You did it then, and you did it again, didn't you? You did it again. I read the decision. I read the majority decision written by Roberts, and I got to tell you, I loved Anthony Scalia's dissent. Because he flat out calls a spade, and he just absolutely is beside himself in this. Anthony Scalia is possibly the greatest legal mind we have alive today. And he just flat out calls it. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you do. I'm not going to take the time to read it right now. It doesn't make for great talk radio, but it is well worth your time. So I would highly recommend you do that when you have an opportunity. But the bottom line here is, we faced a simple phrase, didn't we? We faced a simple phrase that tax credits will be offered to the people who purchase their policies on exchanges that were established by the states. Now it says states. It doesn't say the state, as can sometimes be used to refer to the federal government. It says the states. Obviously, meaning the individual states. We had admissions on the record by Jonathan Kruper, the man who was the architect for Obamacare, that wording was intentional, that is exactly what it meant. It was intended to bully the individual states into forming their own exchanges. It was intended for the express purpose of forcing the states to form their own exchanges. Why? Because the federal government didn't really want to bother with this. They wanted this to be another one of those unfunded mandate kind of things. They weren't about to risk not having something available for citizens that needed it, because they wanted to get people in every state on board with this. They need so many people who weren't able to get insurance before getting something, especially the folks who could get enough in the form of these tax credits to actually cover their policies completely, so they weren't really paying anything. They wanted to get enough people on there so they would have people on their side in every state. They wanted these people on their side because they thought that the reaction of citizens in each state would be to demand that their state capital set up exchanges, because there was no way in Hades that the American citizen is going to pay in money for this program in which that there's no way they could ever get a benefit from it. That's the way it was written. They were shocked and surprised that several states said, no. Some of them because of highly conservative values. Some of them just because the states were lazy. Like, well, if the feds are going to do it anyway, why should we bother? I mean, I'd like to say it was all because everyone stood on principle and stood against it, but the bottom line is it wasn't that. A lot of states were. Some not so much. But the bottom line here is that Jonathan Gruber had admitted it publicly and had done so, and there's no way that the members of the court were not aware of this. So they knew going in that one little phrase did in fact mean no tax credits, no subsidies for people purchasing through the federal exchange. Now, of course, when Jonathan Gruber was making these statements and publicly telling everybody that, oh, well, this is just not the case, and we don't even know who this guy is, he never worked for us, kind of bullcrap, try and distance themselves from the truth. Only last week, a selection of Jonathan Gruber's White House emails came to light. It showed that Mr. Gruber worked very closely, much more closely than previously known, in fact. Certainly far more closely than ever admitted, with the White House and top federal officials to shape and influence the law. The truth came out. Can't be denied anymore. And Jonathan Gruber never lied about it. He called the American voters stupid. He said they were counting on the stupidity of the American voter in order to pass Obamacare in the first place. And he repetitively said statements that essentially equates to the ends justify the means. I would much rather not do this, but it's far more important for us to have this law. That is, the ends justify the means. And he, over and over again, has said that. And he has, over and over again, admitted publicly that, yes, this law was written this way on purpose, with cause. The plan being that this is to force the states into compliance.